On the build show today, we're going deep on stucco. I love stucco. It's an amazing finish for a house. But if you saw our last episode, stucco can have its problems. You know, this has caused a lot of rot on houses in the past, and it's not so much the stucco itself, but it's what's behind it and how it's installed. So we're gonna get into some details today on how to do this right, and we're gonna do that whether you're building a house in Fargo, North Dakota, or Austin, Texas like I am. Let's get going. On the build show today, we're talking stucco. Now this stucco finish behind me is a beautiful La Habra smooth. This is integral color where you can actually see some variances, that mottled texture. I really like that. But whether you're doing this or whether you're doing traditional painted, we're gonna get into the details on how to do it right. Now I'm actually at a job site mock-up. Believe it or not, this is not a house, but the house is right behind me here. And I'm building in Austin, Texas. Now Texas is a very different climate than you if you're building in, let's say, Minnesota or Boston or Chicago. So I'm going to show you three different assemblies, really what's happening behind the stucco. They're going to work no matter where you are, no matter what part of the US you're building, and ultimately no matter what type of stucco is your final coat. One quick detail I want to point out on this, which I think is super cool, the architects we're working with here, Shiflet Group, has this really cool eave detail where we've actually raked the stucco. And we'll show you on the other side, that's actually a foam detail that the stucco guys stucco over, and it mates in with that clay tile. Such a cool detail. First though, let's go back to the office and I'm going to show you some assemblies that are going to work in any climate zone. And we'll come back to this job site in just a minute and show you how we did it here. Okay guys, we're going to get into some real nitty-gritty of some assemblies that work for stucco. But if you missed the last build show, let me give just a 30-second recap on why this is so important. Now last time we talked about this, so go to the video if you want to see the long version, but here's the quick version. This stucco house built in 1938 still looks beautiful today, and here's why. The entire inside of the house was all wood exterior sheathing, wood 2x4s, wood interior sheathing. So any amount of leakage or any problems that water came through the stucco, this assembly was able to absorb it all and have no problems whatsoever. There was also no insulation, so there was plenty of drying through there because there was plenty of heat flow through the walls and through the exterior envelope. There was also probably a fair amount of airflow through this building as well. So even though this house had stucco that's very old, when the remodel happened, there was really no rot to speak of. The house was in excellent shape even 80 years later. Now the other house that I talked about briefly, this one was a pretty young project, not even a 20-year-old house, but look at all the massive problems that we reviewed last time. Now the stucco did have some overwhelming issues with it. This one was a problem where the sprinkler system was hitting it probably every night for an hour and just absolutely soaking the stucco, which meant that the two layers of asphalt impregnated tar paper were overwhelmed and rotted. They could never dry. And we also had a ton of parapet cap leaks. So there was multiple issues on this stucco project. But the point is, modern assemblies, modern construction, modern materials, much more sensitive to water. We really need to take a best practice for waterproofing. So here's the lessons learned between those two. Stucco does leak. No matter what stucco you've got, you can never caulk it enough. You can never build it perfect enough that it won't leak and bring some water behind the stucco. Again, houses are sensitive the way we're building today and the materials we're building with today. So what do we need to do? We need to control what's behind the stucco. That's what we need to do when we're building new. We need to get a really good waterproofing and air barrier system on our houses to make sure that that stucco is really going to last just like that other house that looks going to look beautiful 80 years from now. Because stucco is a very durable assembly. It's basically a sidewalk on the outside of your house. It's a 3/4 inch coat of almost cement. So this is a great assembly. I love stucco on the outside of the house, but what goes on behind the stucco is really key. I love this quote from David Nicastro. It's not about keeping the water out, meaning you can't just face seal your stucco. It's about letting the water out. And let's talk about that now. So what is a good assembly? A good assembly, a basic assembly for any house should be this right here. A house wrap with some amount of small gap behind the stucco. And let me show you what these look like. And I also do want to mention that in all the remodel projects that I've done over the years, it's the windows that are contributing probably the most amount of water load behind the stucco. So first off, There's a bunch of products out there that are house wraps that include some kind of gap technology. This is one that we've all seen before. This is Tyvek's Stucco wrap. I've used this for years. Good product. It basically is a version of their standard house wrap that has crinkles on it, almost as if they bundled it up and then laid it back out again. And on this particular image you're seeing here, this is where we had some siding butting up against it, and I got a real tight in view. It looks like that siding is butted close, but in reality there's still a gap there. Now this is another product. This is a house wrap that has kind of a 3D dimple, almost as if they dribbled some drops of plastic on top, so that when the siding or the other claddings go on, it's going to maintain that drainage plane behind. Now check this out. You would think that these very small gaps don't provide enough drainage, but believe it or not, even just a little bit of crinkle or those small dots is going to provide enough that water that gets behind the stucco is going to be able to drain out and make a good drainage plane. I made this video a long time ago, but let me narrate what's going on here. First of all, you'll notice that I have a fantastic mustache, and I wish that I could grow that again. I'm going to talk my wife hopefully into it in November this year, but what I'm doing here is I'm on a house with Tyvek Stucco wrap, which again is a small gap product. I put some water that has a red food dye in it, and then what I've got here is not siding up against it, but some 4x8 sheets of rigid foam. That foam is pushed right up against that house wrap as tight as possible and then nailed on. And then what I'm going to do to demonstrate that it actually does drain is I'm going to pour some of that red dye in between the gap between that 1-inch foam and the house wrap. Now you see here I'm on the ladder, we're pouring this. This video again is a couple years old that I shot. I'll put a link in the description if you want to see the whole video. You can see how young I looked 5 or 6 years ago on YouTube. But look at that, in a matter of just a few seconds, even though that's 8 feet lower, all that water is draining out really, really well because of that crinkle or because of that small gap. This would also work really well if you're using the Benjamin Obdike Hydra Gap, and there's probably some other products on the marketplace as well. And here's an example of that good assembly on a project I did a few years ago. I do want to mention though that on any project you do with more quote-unquote standard house wraps, which I don't use quite as much anymore, I'm going to show you some what I consider some better versions. You want to make sure that your windows are installed at the best possible practices. I also made a video on this project installing these gelled-win windows, but you want to make sure you've got a sill pan under the window, no matter whose project or no matter whose product rather you're using. Use their system to make sure you've got a really good sill pan on there. Make sure you follow all their instructions. You see here we're putting a U-shaped bead of caulking on. We're going to set the window into that U-shaped bead. We're going to use the same manufacturer's flashings. We're going to flap that head back over. We're going to put a head flash on there. It's the windows and the penetrations that are the problems, and you want to make sure that you're absolutely using the best practices. Again, I've got a video on this. I'll link in the description below. But then after that's up, we're going to run at least 1, if not 2 layers of a really good, basically tar paper. Now this happens to be Super Jumbo Tech 60, and that's typically what I use. But now when the stucco gets applied on top of that, you can see here's the lath that's been added there. And the first coat of stucco they call the scratch coat. When they scratch that coat on, that stucco is going to actually bond to that first layer of tar paper. And what happens then is when the water gets past there, now we've got an actual drainage plane in between that tar paper and whatever house wrap you're using behind there so that that water can drain out. And again, this happens to be that crinkly version so that we've got that drainage plane that, believe it or not, will move quite a bit of water out of there. And here's the house during the stucco phase, and there's the final assembly. So now if this window, or pardon me, if this house gets soaked in a rainstorm, we get water that comes in around the gaps and cracks. It's going to hit that waterproofing layer and it's going to actually drain out and keep the very sensitive construction materials, which are wood framing in this case, from getting wet. Okay, so those were some good assemblies. I would call those a baseline. Any stucco project, those should be your baseline for how to get a good assembly. Let me show you some better, or really some best assemblies. Now these first two I'm going to show you, these will work in the north as well as the south. Later I'm going to show you an assembly you're only going to want to do in the south, but These assemblies, you're going to notice a couple things. Number one, we're going to a peel and stick house wrap. A peel and stick house wrap is going to give you really good air tightness as well as waterproofing, and that's really important if you've seen my other airtight videos. And so we're going to be talking about Dorkin's Delta Vend SA, which I've used a bunch, great product for the north. And we're going to be talking about Huber's Zip Wall, again, a great product for the north or the south. And then on top of these, we're going to be adding a bigger gap, a gap that would not only drain, but would promote drying as well. So first off, peel and stick house wraps. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. Check out my other videos, but I'm a huge fan of peel and sticks. This Delta Vend SA, you roll a primer on your substrate, whether that's OSB or plywood, and then you see this guy's pulling the release paper on there, and then we're actually going to run a J-roller on it. This is an incredible product. Really, really big fan. This is a German company that only has started selling this product in North America in the last 10 years or so. I really like it. It works in north climates as well as southern climates. It's got a higher perm rating so that we can promote drying to the outside. If you're in the north, you're in a cold climate. That makes some incredible accessories for window and door installs. Really, really good climate. But what I want to focus on now is how to get that big gap. Not just the drainage, but how to actually promote drying, and that's this product right here. They make a couple different flavors of it now, but I'm going to show you the version that I use the most. This is Dorkin's Delta Dry Stucco and Stone product. And it's basically a dimple mat that has a filter fabric on it. Now I don't have I wish I had a sample in my hand to show you, but let me show you on the photos. You'll notice that it comes in a big roll. I believe it's polyethylene, and it's got dimples on there. And on one side there's a 3D mesh that's on the front, and that's the side that's going to receive the stucco so that the stucco doesn't actually fill all the holes. But what I really like about this product is now I actually have two air gaps behind my stucco. I've got an air gap in front of my waterproofing, and then I've got another air gap right behind the stucco. And then you're going to see later, we're going to vent this on both the top and the bottom so we can promote drying behind our stucco assembly. That's huge. It basically just rolls on the wall. Here's the guys rolling it on this project. You're going to staple it up just to tack it. And then later you're going to come on with your lath coat. That's the chicken wire basically that goes on top of it. And then here's the guys putting the very first scratch coat on. And you can see as he's scratch coating that fabric, that filter fabric that's on the face of it is going to prevent that scratch coat of stucco from filling all the holes. And then we're going to go on with our traditional 3-coat stucco on top of that. But here's where the drying happens. Now this is the base of this project. This happens to be a house by architect Nick Deaver, who did a really cool detail where we put a notch in the slab foundation so the stucco would end up planing out flush with the front of the slab. I really like this detail. But look down here in the bottom, you've got a mesh on the bottom. It kind of looks like a Brillo pad. This is an accessory sold by Dorkin. You're going to put that down first, and then you're going to run your dimple board right on top of that. Again, that's that stucco and stone product, Delta Dry Stucco and Stone. And then your weep screed, that's the metal piece on the bottom there. That's at the very bottom of the stucco. That's what the guys trowel to. That gives you a nice clean edge on the bottom. And it's got weep holes on the bottom. So any water coming down there is going to be able to weep out. And then that Brillo pad is going to prevent the bugs from getting into that airspace back there, but it's going to allow plenty of drying. You also notice that we made a gap between the foundation and that bottom of the weep screed. You do not want to caulk that. That needs to be left open so we've got drainage there. And then at the top of the wall assembly, also you're going to want to put a place that air can get out as well. Now in this case, we ran our stucco all the way into the eave and then put our eave board on later and did not eaves, our soffits rather, and then we put a vented soffit piece in there so that we could get airflow all the way through and out the soffits. So now any water that's getting behind there is going to be able to dry out. One random thing I want to mention too, look at those AC vents coming out there. We've got a really good flashing boot on there. I'll put a link to those in the description. We really want to make sure that everything is totally watertight at the peel and stick house wrap level. And then here's that bottom piece again, getting ready for that first coat of stucco. And here's the house when it's nearly complete. That stucco was beautiful. This is a La Habra smooth final coat. Again, we've got pretty modern architecture, real similar to that bone house, But now think about the stucco. It's going to be able to drain and dry. It's going to be able to really last just like that bone house. This is really a best practice, guys. Okay, one more photo of that house. Isn't that a cool house? Had kind of a mix of both stucco and some wood siding on there. Pretty house. Next, let's talk about how to do the same assembly with another product that I really like called Huber's Zip Wall. Now, if you're not familiar with this product, this is a sheet good, 4x8 sheets. They sell it in both 1/2 inch and 5/8. This brown version is the 5/8, a little thicker. And they've got a great system for both tapes and fluid applied. This house was a couple years ago, so I wouldn't use that Carlisle flashing at the bottom anymore. I'd use their fluid applied to both air seal and water seal at the base where the slab meets the framing. But I like this system. It's a great water, it's a great airproofing system, but to make sure that we don't have problems with this house for the life of the house, and we're talking about the next couple hundred years, again, we want that air gap. We want to make sure that any water that's getting past that stucco is going to have a nice fat drainage plane that it can drain out and then air can flow in there and dry it. If we do that, we're going to turn this house into a house that's really going to last and have a stucco job that's going to look fantastic. Here's the guys rolling out the Dorkin Delta Dry stucco and stone. They're going to staple that up and put the lath on there. I do want to briefly mention, look on the right here, we've got these white verticals right there. That's going to be a rain screen system for some wood horizontal lap siding we've got on this house. Again, any claddings on the outside of the house are going to make a huge benefit to the cladding and to the longevity of the building by putting an air gap or a rain screen gap behind them. And that's what those vertical battens are. That's basically a plastic batten that we bought from Coroplast. We bought it in 4x8 sheets, ripped it down. There's some commercial versions you can buy on that as well. I'll put a link to the commercial versions. But now when I put my siding up, I've got an air gap on there. And then when I put my stucco up, I've got an air gap behind it as well. Pretty straightforward system. The stucco guys have been using it now on my projects for about this project's about 4 years old or so. It's really straightforward. It works really well. My stucco guys like it a lot. And then there's the final stucco. Just to prevent the comments, why is the plastic on the bottom there? This is an integral Keller stucco, and when it rains, we didn't have gutters up yet, and in fact there's a couple parts of this house we don't have gutters. We want to make sure that that dirt wasn't splashing back onto our sensitive stucco, because this was a integral Keller. It wasn't getting painted, so we wanted to prevent that dirt stain on the bottom. We came in not too long after this and mulched around there as well, so we wouldn't have dirt that would splash up. Beautiful house. Architecture on that house is by Ament and Plum, a Boston-based company. Okay, so then what's one more assembly? I've got a third assembly for you that's only a southern assembly. I would not use this in the north. And let's actually go out to a job site where I've got one under construction. I'll meet you there. All right, guys, and the final assembly I want to review with you is this house right here. Now, I'm building in Austin, Texas. We're in a hot, humid climate zone. And this assembly is only for those of you who are building in the south. This is really climate zones 1 through 3. So if you get real cold winters, don't follow this advice. Go back to my other assemblies with the Delta Vent SA or the Huber Zip. Those are going to work much better in those northern climates, but I really like this assembly for the south. Here's what we've got here. This silver face material, I've done a bunch of videos on this before. In fact, look in the description for a link. This is called AlumaFlash by PolyWall. This is a peel and stick product that's really thick. It's about 40 mils thick, very bomber. It's basically like an ice and water shield on the outside of the house. And I like this because I've trained my crews to install this during construction, but I especially like it in the south because of the silver foil here. Now, the beauty of the silver foil is that I can leave this product exposed for up to 2 years on my job sites. And believe it or not, a lot of the complicated jobs I do like this one take me 2 years start to finish. So having that silver facer and not being worried about this getting a sunburn over time, really, really helpful. But ultimately, what I really like about it is it makes a killer waterproofing. Right? We use ice and water shields on our roofs because it's waterproof, and there's some nail sealability as we nail through that. And the same is true with this AlumaFlash. Because it's really thick and gummy, it's got that rubberized asphalt base to this, means that we've got really good waterproofing, and we can use products like this. They're fluid applied. This is their Blue Barrier 2200. We can use that around our windows and our doors, all those details and penetrations. Now on top of this, here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be using 2 layers of a slightly more expensive asphalt impregnated tar paper. This is actually Super Jumbo Tex by Fortifiber. This is their 60-minute version, and you can see here we're actually doing 2 layers of it, and we're overlapping that and shingling that properly as we go up the wall. We're also shingling that over top of our weep screed at the bottom here. So this bottom piece that has the holes cut in on it, this is called the weep screed, and ultimately this is where the stucco is going to come out to. And this is approximately 3/4 inch thick, which is what you're going to get with the final thickness of the stucco. So that double layer of 60-pound felt is coming on top of this, and then we're going to add our lath, and I'll show you that in the front of the house in a second, so that when we bring our 3-coat stucco, it's going to be flush in the bottom here. Any water that gets through the stucco is going to hit that paper, and it's going to run down. Now, why 2 layers? I really like the double insurance of having 2 layers, because the first coat, the scratch coat that I put on there, is actually going to bond to that paper. And then when it gets wet the first time, the paper is going to crinkle up, kind of like what we talked about earlier with those crinkly house wraps, and that's going to make a really good drainage plane in between my waterproofing layer, which is that AlumaFlash on here, and then we've got that backup protection of a second layer behind that. This is an assembly, again, that you want to use in the south, but you don't want to use this assembly in the north, because this is also a vapor barrier. We don't want that in the north. We want to make sure that we can drive through our buildings in the wintertime. We only want the vapor barrier on the warm side of the wall, and that's not true in the wintertime if you're in the north. You'd want that only on the inside, not on the outside. So the Delta Vent SA, that's your product to use in the north, or that Huber Zip. But if you're building, like I am, houses that have no overhangs oftentimes, houses with lots of exposure in the south, this is a great way to go. Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this stucco edition of the Build Show. There's, of course, a ton more to say about this. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a series on how to actually do the 3 coats and some steps that might be helpful to you in terms of crack reduction and finish options, that sort of thing. I'm not sure if that's something you guys would want to see, so comment below if that's interesting to you. Also, if you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button. We've got new content every Tuesday and every Friday. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on The Build Show.